Green Deal, for instance, we have the left pushing a policy of simultaneously open borders and a welfare state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you come up with the math that where any sane person, and I'm talking about anybody with an IQ over about 15, anybody come up with the economic viability of open borders and a welfare state? I mean, we think we're seeing caravans now. We're not seeing anything. I mean, if the left gets their way about what's going on with the borders, that alone will bankrupt us. But
you serious?
Right. All right. Now, starting with protecting taxpayers. So how many people have ever heard that Milton Friedman said, quote, "You cannot simultaneously have free immigration and a welfare state," end quote? Yes, I have had multiple people quoting this back to me on Twitter as a refutation of the book, saying, well, gee, Milton Friedman says it in the book. He's right there in the book telling me this, so I am aware of the argument. I do have a chapter on it, so yes, I fine point, interesting objection, but it's not unknown to me. All right, and the simple story is this. The American welfare state does pay more for idleness than many countries pay for work, and that's absolutely true. All right, so the standard of living on someone in the U.S. on welfare is enough to make the typical Haitian drool with envy. All right, and then the next step is, so obviously a lot of immigrants are going to come to abuse the system. Now that is quite a bit less clear because it's like, yeah, well, but once you're here, you aren't going to be comparing welfare to the wages in your home country. You'll probably be comparing welfare here to work here. Right? But in any case, this is the kind of question, though, that is highly empirical. Right? So a lot of people think that they can figure out the numbers in the budget in their heads through intuition. And if there is anything for which human intuition is not suited, it is that. Right? Going over complicated financials of an entire budgetary system, most of which people don't even understand the basics of, it's really hard to do that. How are you supposed to do it? By getting boring and sitting down and looking at a bunch of numbers, or you can also rely upon the division of labor and find the careful, boring people who have done this careful, boring work, and then go and read it through. And of course, you don't want to just read things that agree with you, which I made a strong effort not to do. All right. Now, key fact about the U.S. welfare state, this is actually true for all known welfare states, is that they focus a lot more on the old than the poor. So once you know this does just tip the scales towards maybe immigrants aren't going to be a burden, because though immigrants, especially the ones we don't let in right now, would probably be poor, they're also likely to be young. And so then, all right, well, poor but young. Where does the math work out on that? Right? Anyway, so the upshot of this is that when you actually go over and do the work, and again, so if you trust me, great, then what I'm telling you is true. Believe me. All right. If you don't, then all I can say is check the references. I tried to do a very careful job and not go and only read people that agreed with me, but rather find the highest quality, most prestigious sources. So anyway, the upshot is that almost no serious researcher finds a big negative fiscal effect of immigration. Right. So in the book, rely heavily upon the National Academy of Sciences estimates from a couple of years ago. And here are the numbers that they get. Now, by the way, these numbers are the good kind of numbers. So they don't just look at the immediate fiscal effect of an immigrant. They don't just look at the taxes that an immigrant pays the year they arrive minus the services they consume the year they arrive. Instead, of course, you want to go and get a longer time horizon. And furthermore, it would be cheating to ignore the fact that immigrants are going to have kids. Right? So you want to take into account, well, if they're 25, they may not have kids now, but then they'll have kids. Those kids are going to be getting school 5 years after that. You want to put that stuff in. All right. But then, once you're doing that, then you want to say, but then the kids grow up and eventually they pay taxes, so we want to put that in. Right? So that's why these are estimates. Right? These are things that haven't happened yet, but nevertheless, there are better and worse ways of doing those kinds of estimates. All right. So what does the National Academy of Sciences say? First result. For the immigrants that we receive now, the average fiscal effect is a substantial net positive of plus $58,000. Then they go and look, how about immigrants who only have high school degree? Then they come up with a lower number, plus 49,000. All right, then you look at high school dropout foreigners, high school dropout immigrants. That's where they come up with a negative number of negative 117,000. All right, but then you go and break it down by age, and then they find that even low-skilled immigrants are still a fiscal positive as long as they are young. So really, Friedman's argument comes down to saying, look, low-skilled elderly people are a burden, right? And as I say in the book, right, so that does seem to be true, but then where is this cannot coming from? It's one thing if the typical person coming would be a burden, but if it's a matter of one particular demographic, the low-skilled elderly ones, like, can you go and have open immigration for everyone, even though one out of many of the demographics is a fiscal negative, right? And I say you totally can. And then I have an argument with Milton Friedman about whether or not the fact that some babies are likely to be a burden on taxpayers is a reason to restrict human reproduction, right? And yeah, so anyway, that's a fun part of the book. I got the babies yelling at Milton, but all right. Okay. Now, finally, if you think these numbers are absurd, like, how are we getting these good numbers? How can someone who earns below the median American salary be a net positive for the U.S. Treasury? Right? And the answer is that built into these numbers is the fact that a lot of government spending is what economists call non-rival, meaning that the cost of the government service does not vary with the population, or at least increases less proportionately with population. So whatever your views on foreign policy are, there's probably a lot of unusual views here, I'm guessing, but whatever those views are, if we had a new baby boom, there's 30 million new American babies, who would say, now that we have all these babies, we need to expand the nuclear arsenal to take care of them? Right? That would be a bizarre thing to say, because you can defend those babies just as well when the military exists. Right? So very often, letting in a lower-skilled immigrant is like letting in someone for reduced price at a matinee at a movie theater. Do movie theaters lose money by having cheap tickets at matinees? No, they don't. Could they stay in business if everyone paid the matinee price? They probably couldn't. But you can still make money by letting in someone who pays more than they cost, even though what they're paying is less than the typical amount. All right, then we have protecting